How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the Skyrim discussion video. Today, we're going to be talking about what is better, Greatswords, Battleaxes, or Warhammers. Now, I made another video quite similar to this, where it was the one-handed equivalent of what's better, daggers, swords, axes, or maces. And in that video, I think I briefly discussed two-handed weapons, but today I want to take a more isolated approach to the two-handed weapons side of things. So, when it comes to the differences between the three, Warhammers, Battleaxes, and Greatswords, it comes down to the main differences being swing speed, damage, and stagger. So those three things are kind of like the main real differences. So Greatswords do the least damage of the three, but they swing the fastest, and they have the least stagger. So they do the least damage, the least stagger, but the fastest swing speed. Warhammers do the most damage, they have the most stagger, and they swing the slowest, and Battleaxes is in the middle. So basically what it comes down to is DPS. How much damage can you do a second? That's really the most important thing. And so when you take into account the balancing they did with the stagger, I would say that it's less important than you'd think. So stagger, what that basically means is when you power attack somebody, stagger is when they kind of fall back for a second. So I'll tell you why that's not really that important, especially because it kind of cancels out, right? If you have a great sword and you power attack somebody, they're gonna get staggered quite a bit. Like any two-handed weapon is gonna stagger somebody quite a bit, but a great sword will stagger them a little bit, well, quite a bit, but a little bit relative to the other two. So you'll be able to get about 2 regular attacks on them before they are ready to block your next attack. So basically you get the power attack and 2 free hits. Now, in my experience with Battleaxes, you actually don't get that same treatment. You get 1 power attack, and you can get almost always 1 free hit, but you sometimes get the second hit, sometimes you don't. And with the Warhammer, I find that the stagger is such that you get a power attack, and you pretty much always get 2 free hits. So if we're talking about the stagger side of things, the Battleaxe has the worst stagger to hit ratio. So from that standpoint, DPS wise, I would say Battleaxes kind of suffers because the power attacks are less impactful, from my experience. Now, the damage difference between a Warhammer and a Greatsword is pretty solid. Like, it's a pretty big difference. So it basically becomes a matter of, are you good enough to hit your shots every time? Because if you're good enough to always hit your shots and you never really miss and you never really make much mistakes, then playing with a Warhammer is very good because, you know, if you miss a hit, it's pretty punishing because the swing speed is so damn slow. So if you have high stamina and you have high accuracy, like your actual skill, you should do really good with the Warhammers and you shouldn't really face much consequence. But if you kind of want to just have a more fast approach, Greatswords are really, really good because they swing really fast and they do still deal great damage. It's in the name, great sword, great damage, you know. Now the next thing we gotta talk about is in the two-handed perk tree, you can actually invest into one specific branch. So you can have skill, you can put skill points into Greatswords, which will give you a chance to have a critical hit, which is very good. Or if you invest in Battleaxes, every time you hit somebody with a Battleaxe, it will cause bleeding damage, which is absolutely worthless as it does almost no damage at all. And in fact, the bleed damage that you do with a Battleaxe isn't even equivalent to half the damage you would do with 1 swing of the Battleaxe. So it's not even like the bleed is a benefit. The bleed is just like a tiny push towards death, which isn't really helpful when you have a weapon that already does massive damage. You know, a weapon so powerful that it can 5-shot an enemy doesn't need a tiny boost, it needs a big boost to be really good. Now Warhammers, if you invest in them, what you get is Warhammers can ignore armor rating. So if you invest in that, basically what it'll do is Warhammers will ignore 50% of an enemy's armor rating. Now on paper, that sounds ridiculously good. And I actually used to think that it was ridiculously good until you take into account most enemies do not have high armor ratings. Like, think about it. Most enemies, first of all, most enemies aren't even humanoid. Most enemies are undead, like a skeleton or a draugr. You have bears, you have wolves, you have frostbite spiders, you have falmer. Most enemies simply do not have an existing armor rating, and the ones that do, like a bandit outlaw, it only has an armor rating of about like 60, because it only really has like studded armor, and at best, even at the late game, the best bandits that aren't bandit chiefs will simply have a leather armor. So you're really not ignoring much when you pick that. However, with the Greatswords, the crit chance, the critical attack does a lot of damage, by the way. I think it does like a 50% more damage. It's either 50% or 100%, I forget. But it does a shit ton of damage. Not only does it do a ton of damage, but it's beneficial in every situation. It doesn't matter if you're fighting a bear, a giant, a dragon, a draugr deathlord, a bandit chief, a civilian. It doesn't matter who you're fighting, you will have a chance to do a critical attack, and it will do massive damage. So from that standpoint, I mean, in my opinion, Battleaxes aren't really in the question. Battleaxes are kind of just bad. I mean, if you like the aesthetic, then by all means, go for it. But from a gameplay perspective, Battleaxes are too slow, they don't do enough damage, and their perk, the bleed perk, it doesn't do anything at all. It's actually just like an inconvenience. It's actually a waste of perk points. Battleaxes, in my opinion, are completely out of the question. The only saving grace is that the Battleaxes have one good unique Battleaxe, and that's Wuthrad. Wuthrad is a Battleaxe that has really high base damage, but it does extra damage to elves. And you get this by completing the Companion's questline. It was actually Ysgramor's axe that he used when he came to Skyrim with the Nords and they drove out these snow elves. So that's why it does extra damage to elves, which is pretty situational because most enemies aren't elves. Like if you're sieging a Thalmor embassy or like Northwatch Keep, it's gonna help quite a bit, but most bandits are not gonna be elves simply because there's only 3 elf races. There's only, well, technically there's 4. You have Wood Elf, High Elf, Dark Elf. Most bandits are not those 3 simply because there's literally 12 races in the game. So there's basically a 1 in 4 chance that you're fighting an elf. But the other race of elves is Falmer, which actually you do benefit a lot from because Falmer are pretty fucking tough. So having Wuthrad is really good for that, but generally speaking, Wuthrad is the only saving grace for Battleaxes, and even then, it's a situational saving grace. So it basically comes down to, do you want to have a Warhammer that swings very slowly, but if you manage to hit an enemy with their shield down, aka if you power attack them, you do insane damage to them, and you ignore their armor rating, which is situationally good? Or do you want that? Or do you want a greatsword, which still does massive damage? It swings pretty fast, it can stagger enemies pretty hard, and it has a chance to do critical attacks that do extra damage. Now for me personally, if we're talking about generic weapons, like if we're talking about like a Daedric Greatsword or a Daedric Warhammer, I would pick the Greatsword. I think Greatswords are much better than Warhammers, as they do a little bit less damage. They do about like 10% less damage, but the critical chance makes up for it, and the swing speed makes up for it. However, there is 2 Warhammers that are really good, and that is Volendrung and the Champion's Cudgel. Champion's Cudgel you get in the Dragonborn DLC for killing General Falk's Carius, and it does a lot of damage. It has a base damage of 24, which is pretty high, and has a 50% chance for each element of Fire, Frost, and Shock to do 25 damage. So basically, every hit you do, there's a 50% chance that you would do an extra 75 damage. That is insane, especially if you pair it up with the ignore armor rating perks and you have like high stamina so you can power attack a million times. Champion's Cudgel is ridiculously good. Then Volendrung is a axe that you get by completing a quest for the orcs in the one of the orc strongholds. I believe it is which one is it? I completely forget. You get it for completing one of the orc quests. And it does 25 base damage, which is slightly higher than the Champion's Cudgel, and it absorbs 50 points of stamina every hit you do, which is pretty damn good because it's not stamina damage, it's absorb stamina, which means not only do you take away 50 stamina from them, so they can't run away and they can't power attack and they can't shield bash, but also you gain stamina, so you can power attack literally infinitely, because every power attack you do gives you 50 stamina to do the next power attack, which gives you another 50, and so on and so on. So if you invest really heavily into two-handed, then I would say Warhammers are the better option if you use Volendrung or the Champion's Cudgel. However, if you don't want to use those unique weapons and you simply just want to do a casual, playthrough, Greatswords is the option for you. Thank you guys so much for watching, I really appreciate it. Let me know in the comments if you agree or if you disagree, or if there's anything I missed out on. Please let me know, and yeah, if you enjoyed, leave a like. If you didn't enjoy, please leave a dislike. I'll see you all next time, stay awesome, and peace out.